On the night of April 4th, 1958, Good Friday, police were called to a Moorish mansion at 730 North Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills. Someone had died. When the detectives walked into the upstairs bedroom, they found a small group of people crouched over the body of a man, trying and failing to bring him back to life. He had been stabbed once, in the abdomen, with an 8-inch kitchen knife, and he had bled to death internally within minutes. The man on the floor was Johnny Stompanato, a violent enforcer for the Los Angeles crime boss Mickey Cohen. The house belonged to Lana Turner, one of the most glamorous movie stars in the world, the original sweater girl, an MGM legend. And the person who had driven the knife into Johnny Stompanato was Lana Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane. That is the story America was told, and it is, as far as anyone has ever been able to prove, the truth. A 14-year-old girl heard her mother being threatened, ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, came back, and killed the man who was menacing her mother. The coroner's jury ruled it justifiable homicide. Cheryl Crane was never charged. She was 14 years old, and she had killed a man to protect her mother, and the law let her go. But almost immediately, a darker theory began to circulate, and it has never fully gone away in the 60-plus years since. The theory was this, that Cheryl Crane did not do it at all. That Lana Turner, the movie star, had killed Johnny Stompanato herself, in a rage or in self-defense, and that she had persuaded her 14-year-old daughter to take the blame, because a 14-year-old would be treated as a juvenile and would walk free, while a grown movie star might go to prison. The theory held that Lana Turner sacrificed her own child's name and future to save her career, letting a little girl carry the label of killer so that the star could go on being a star. The evidence, as we will see, actually points the other way. Police reports indicate that it was Lana who tried to take the blame, who asked the authorities to let her say she had done it, and that it was Cheryl who insisted, firmly, that she was the one who had held the knife. But the theory persisted, because the public could not quite believe that a 14-year-old girl had done such a thing, and because Lana Turner's tearful testimony at the inquest struck many people as a performance, the greatest performance of her career, delivered to save her daughter and, not incidentally, herself. And underneath the sensational headlines, underneath the mobster and the movie star and the knife on the bedroom floor, there was something far sadder and far more disturbing than a simple killing, because the reason a 14-year-old girl was willing to grab a knife and defend her mother from a violent man, the reason she was primed to see her mother in mortal danger and to act, went back years before Johnny Stompanato ever entered the house. Cheryl Crane had already survived something no child should survive, and the man who had done it to her was another one of her mother's husbands. This is the story of the night Cheryl Crane killed Johnny Stompanato in her mother's bedroom, the blame she took and never fully put down, and the childhood of abuse and neglect that had prepared a 14-year-old to pick up a knife. It is the story of a daughter who protected a mother who had failed, again and again, to protect her. And it is the story of what that single moment cost the girl who survived it, and how, against everything, she finally found her way out. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. To understand what happened in that bedroom, you have to understand the woman who owned it. And the woman who owned it was, in a very real sense, a manufactured product. Lana Turner was born Julia Jean Turner in 1921, in Wallace, Idaho, into poverty and instability. Her father was a miner and a bootlegger, and a gambler who was murdered when Lana was 9 years old, robbed and killed, his body found with his shoes missing. Her mother struggled to raise her, and Lana grew up moving around, poor, pretty, and hungry for a way out. The way out arrived in the form of one of the most famous discovery stories in Hollywood history, a story that was partly true and partly polished into myth by the studio publicity machine. As a teenager, Lana was spotted at a soda fountain, or a malt shop, the legend goes, by a Hollywood figure who noticed her extraordinary beauty. She was signed, groomed, renamed, and turned into a star. That phrase, turned into a star, matters, because Lana Turner was one of the great creations of the MGM studio system, and the system did to her what it did to all its manufactured goddesses. It took a real girl with real wounds and built a glittering public image on top of her, a persona so complete that the girl underneath sometimes disappeared inside it. Lana became the sweater girl, a symbol of glamour and sex appeal, one of the most photographed women in the world. She starred in hit after hit through the 1940s and into the 1950s. She was, by any external measure, a triumph. But the machine that made her did not make her happy, and it did not make her stable, and it certainly did not make her a mother in any consistent sense. Lana Turner's private life was a churning series of marriages, affairs, and reinventions. Over the course of her life, she married 8 times, to 7 different men. She married band leaders and actors and businessmen, and the marriages collapsed with a regularity that suggested she was searching for something she could not find and could not name, reaching for one man after another, the way a person reaches for a drug that stops working. Her love life was tabloid fuel for decades, a parade of husbands and lovers that kept her name in the columns as much as her films did. Somewhere inside all of that, there was a daughter. Cheryl Crane was born in 1943, Lana's only child, from her marriage to the actor Stephen Crane. And Cheryl grew up inside the strangest possible version of a childhood, materially privileged beyond imagining, and emotionally starved almost completely. She was a Hollywood baby, raised in mansions, surrounded by the trappings of enormous wealth. And she was raised, in every practical sense, by staff, nannies, governesses, a rotating cast of paid caregivers, some kind, some strange, who did the actual work of raising the child while the mother worked, and traveled, and married, and divorced, and lived the life of a movie star, which did not have much room in it for a little girl. Cheryl herself described the reality with painful clarity in her later memoir. Her mother, she said, did not have much time for her, because she was always working. Cheryl had so many stepfathers, and so many of what she called uncles, the boyfriends who came and went, that the household was a place of constant flux, new men appearing, old men vanishing, no stability, no reliable adult presence except the hired help. She was a poor little rich girl in the most literal sense, surrounded by everything money could buy, and starved of the one thing it could not, which was a present, protective parent. This is the environment that shaped Cheryl Crane. Not a home, but a stage set. Not a family, but a series of arrangements. A beautiful, famous, largely absent mother who loved her daughter in her way, but was too consumed by her own turbulent life to protect her. And a succession of men moving through the house, some of them harmless, at least one of them a predator. Because the instability was not just emotional, the parade of stepfathers and uncles through Lana Turner's home meant that a vulnerable, under-supervised little girl was exposed, again and again, to grown men who had access to her and little accountability. And one of those men, one of Lana's husbands, was going to do something to Cheryl Crane that would mark her for life, years before Johnny Stompanato ever walked through the door. His name was Lex Barker, and he played Tarzan. In 1953, Lana Turner married her 4th husband, an actor named Lex Barker, who was famous at the time for playing Tarzan in a string of popular jungle adventure films. He was tall, handsome, athletic, the very image of a wholesome American hero. 10-year-old Cheryl was a flower girl at the wedding, and the man who had just become her stepfather, the matinee idol who swung through the trees rescuing people on screen, began, almost immediately, to sexually abuse her. This is the part of the story that has to be told carefully, both because of its gravity and because Cheryl Crane herself chose, decades later, to tell it publicly, and her account is the source of what we know. In her 1988 memoir, Detour, Cheryl revealed that Lex Barker sexually abused her from the ages of 10 to 13. She described a pattern of escalating assault that took place in the home, under the roof she shared with her mother, while her mother remained unaware. The abuse was severe. It was sustained, and it happened to a child who already had no reliable protector because her mother was absent and the household was a place where men came and went without accountability. Think about the position this child was in. She was being assaulted by one of the most trusted-seeming men in America, in her own home, and the one person who should have protected her, her mother, was either working or traveling or simply not paying the kind of attention that would have caught it. Cheryl was alone with it, the way abused children are so often alone with it, carrying a secret that was destroying her, while the adults around her saw nothing. When she was 13, she finally told someone. She confided in her grandmother, Lana's own mother, the one stable maternal presence in her life. And her grandmother told Lana. Lana Turner's reaction, as Cheryl described it, was immediate and violent. According to Cheryl's memoir, upon learning what Barker had done, Lana took a gun and held it to Lex Barker's head while he slept. She did not pull the trigger, but she made it clear that the marriage was over and that he was to leave, and Barker was gone from their lives shortly afterward, the marriage ending in 1957. There is something revealing in that gun-to-the-head moment, and it connects directly to what would happen a year later with Johnny Stompanato. Lana Turner, confronted with a threat to her daughter, was capable of reaching for a weapon and putting it to a man's head. She had it in her. The capacity for that kind of violent, protective rage was demonstrably present in the household. Keep that in mind, because when the conspiracy theories later swirled about who really killed Johnny Stompanato, this incident, a mother holding a gun to the head of a man who had hurt her child, would hang over the question. But the deeper significance of the Barker abuse is what it did to Cheryl and what it set up. Because here was a girl who, by the age of 13, had already learned the most damaging lesson a child can learn, that the adults responsible for protecting her would not protect her. Her mother had been absent while she was being assaulted for 3 years. The system of her life, the nannies and the uncles and the stepfathers, had failed her completely. She had had to save herself by finally telling her grandmother because no one had been watching closely enough to save her. And notice what the resolution taught her too. When the threat was finally revealed, the response was a weapon, a gun to the head, violence as the answer to a man who threatened the family. That was the model of how danger got dealt with in Lana Turner's house. Not police, not courts, not careful adult intervention, but a mother with a gun, taking matters into her own hands. So by the time Johnny Stompanato entered their lives, Cheryl Crane was a specific kind of 14-year-old. She was a survivor of prolonged sexual abuse. She had learned that she could not count on adults to protect her, that she might have to act herself. She had watched her mother respond to a threat with a weapon, and she carried underneath her privileged Hollywood exterior a well of trauma and hypervigilance and a fierce, wounded protectiveness, especially toward the mother who had failed to protect her but whom she loved anyway, desperately, the way abused and neglected children so often love the parents who let them down. She was primed. She was a child who had already survived one predator in her home and had learned that safety was something you might have to seize for yourself, with a weapon, because no one else would hand it to you. And then her mother brought home a violent gangster. Johnny Stompanato did not enter Lana Turner's life as a boyfriend. He entered it as part of a criminal scheme. Stompanato was a former Marine-turned-gangster, an enforcer and bodyguard for Mickey Cohen, the notorious Los Angeles crime boss who had inherited much of Bugsy Siegel's underworld operation. Stompanato was handsome in a dangerous way, well-built, well-dressed, and he had a particular role in Cohen's organization that made him useful for a specific kind of crime. According to accounts of Cohen's operations, Stompanato was used as bait in blackmail schemes, a honey trap, seducing wealthy and famous people, and then, with Cohen's men, capturing evidence that could be used for extortion. The targets of these schemes reportedly included some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Lana Turner was, by this account, a mark. She was a wealthy, famous, romantically vulnerable movie star, exactly the kind of target Cohen and Stompanato specialized in. Stompanato was deployed to seduce her, to get close to her, to create the intimate access that a blackmail operation required. He met her in 1957, presented himself under a slightly different name at first, and pursued her with the practiced charm of a professional. And then something happened that the scheme had not accounted for. Whether he actually fell for her, or simply saw a bigger opportunity in a real relationship with a movie star than in a one-time blackmail payout, Stompanato became Lana Turner's genuine boyfriend. He inserted himself into her life, her homes, her travels. He even developed ambitions of becoming a movie producer, of using his connection to Lana to launder himself into legitimate Hollywood. What had started as a con became a real and deeply destructive relationship. Because Johnny Stompanato, whatever his feelings for Lana, was a violent, controlling, abusive man, and the relationship became a nightmare. He was intensely jealous. He shouted at her, threatened her, and physically assaulted her. He hit her. He controlled her. He followed her. When Lana was in England filming a movie, Stompanato flew there and reportedly assaulted her so severely and threatened her co-star Sean Connery that the situation became notorious. Connery, the story goes, physically stood up to Stompanato, but Lana had no such recourse in her private moments with him. She was, by the accounts that later emerged, a battered woman, trapped in a relationship with a violent criminal who would not let her go. And she was afraid of him. This is crucial to everything that followed. Lana Turner was genuinely frightened of Johnny Stompanato, frightened of his violence, frightened of what he might do to her, and, as later became clear, frightened of what he might do to her daughter. He had made threats. He had threatened to disfigure her, to cut her face, to hurt the people she loved. For a movie star whose entire career depended on her beauty, the threat to slash her face was a threat aimed at her very existence, and it was the kind of threat a man like Stompanato was fully capable of carrying out. The household during this period was saturated with fear and conflict, and Cheryl, now 14, was living inside it. She heard the fights. She heard the shouting and the cursing that erupted between her mother and Stompanato behind closed doors. She saw, or sensed, or knew that her mother was in danger, that this man was violent, that the arguments were not ordinary arguments but something more menacing. For a girl already primed by years of trauma to be hypervigilant about danger in her home, already conditioned to believe that she might have to protect herself and her mother because no one else would, the presence of a violent gangster in the house was a slow-building catastrophe. There was also a paper trail that would later become part of the scandal. Stompanato and Lana had exchanged love letters, and these letters, some of them, would eventually leak to the press after his death, published to the fascination and titillation of the public, exposing the intimate and dysfunctional dynamics of the relationship. The letters made the affair, and its ugliness, a matter of public consumption, but that was still to come. By the spring of 1958, Lana Turner was trying to end the relationship, and Johnny Stompanato was not accepting it. A violent, controlling man does not let go of a valuable, famous girlfriend quietly, and the tension was escalating towards something. Lana wanted him out of her life. Stompanato was fighting to stay in it, with threats and intimidation and the ever-present possibility of violence. It came to a head on the evening of Good Friday, April 4th, 1958, in Lana Turner's bedroom, with her 14-year-old daughter listening on the other side of the door. On the evening of April 4th, 1958, Lana Turner and Johnny Stompanato were in her upstairs bedroom, and they were fighting, and it was escalating towards something worse than the fights that had come before. Lana was trying, again, to end the relationship. Stompanato was refusing, again, to accept it. But this time the argument turned toward the specific kind of threat that Lana most feared. Stompanato began threatening her, threatening to hurt her, to cut her, to destroy the face and the body that were the foundation of her career and her identity. By the accounts that emerged, he was raging, out of control, and Lana was genuinely afraid for her safety, perhaps for her life. Cheryl was downstairs, and she could hear it. the shouting, the cursing, the unmistakable sound of her mother in danger. And everything in her history, the years of abuse she had survived, the lesson that adults would not protect her, the model of her mother holding a gun to a threatening man's head, the constant hypervigilance of a traumatized child, converged in that moment into a single, terrible impulse. She had to protect her mother. She went to the kitchen. She took a knife, an 8-inch carving knife, newly purchased, very sharp, and she went back upstairs to her mother's bedroom door, and she stood outside it, holding the knife, listening to the man threaten to hurt her mother, trying to decide what to do. What happened in the next few seconds is the thing that has been debated for more than 60 years, but Cheryl's own account, given in her memoir, is specific and consistent. She said she picked up the knife. She stood at the door, and then the door flew open. Her mother stood there, her hand on the knob. And behind her mother, coming at her from behind, his arm raised to strike, was Johnny Stompanato. Cheryl described what she did in a single, chilling sequence of short sentences. She took a step forward, she lifted the weapon, and then, in her words, he ran on the blade, it went in. The knife entered Stompanato's abdomen. It was a single wound, but it was catastrophic, severing vital structures and causing massive internal bleeding. Stompanato staggered. He collapsed, and within minutes, on the floor of Lana Turner's bedroom, he was dying, bleeding out internally faster than anyone could help him. Whether he literally ran onto the blade, as Cheryl described, or whether she thrust it into him, is one of the ambiguities that would haunt the case, and Cheryl herself, in later depositions, would say her memory of the exact instant was blurred. Trauma does that. The mind protects itself from its worst moments by fogging them. But the essential fact was not in dispute at the scene. Johnny Stompanato had been stabbed once with a kitchen knife, and Cheryl Crane, 14 years old, was the one who had been holding it. What happened next, in that bedroom, in the immediate aftermath, is one of the most telling parts of the entire story, and it directly contradicts the conspiracy theory that would soon take hold. Lana called for help. She called her mother, Cheryl's grandmother. She called her personal physician. She called Jerry Giesler, the most famous defense attorney in Hollywood. There was a delay, a period of chaos and panic before the police were formally summoned. A delay that would later fuel suspicion. People tried to revive Stompanato and failed. And when the police finally arrived and walked into that bedroom and found the group huddled over the body, they began to piece together what had happened. According to police accounts, Lana Turner's instinct in those first hours was not to push the blame onto her daughter. It was the opposite. Lana reportedly urged the authorities to let her take responsibility, to let her say that she had been the one who stabbed Stompanato. She wanted to take the blame herself. She was a grown woman, a movie star, and she was prepared, in that moment, to tell the police that she had done it, to protect her child from what was coming. And it was Cheryl who would not let her. Cheryl maintained, firmly and consistently, that she was the one who had used the knife. She told the police the truth as she knew it, that she had done it, that she had stabbed him to protect her mother. In the early hours of April 5th, she was taken to the Beverly Hills Police Department, where she gave a formal statement, and then she was placed in juvenile custody, a 14-year-old girl in a cell, having killed a man a few hours earlier. The detail of who offered to take the blame matters enormously, because the story the public would soon tell itself was that Lana forced Cheryl to be the scapegoat. The actual evidence from the scene points the other way. It was the mother who tried to take the fall, and the daughter who insisted on the truth. But the public was not in that bedroom. The public would get its version of events from a coroner's inquest, held 1 week later, in a courtroom packed with more than 100 journalists, where Lana Turner would deliver the performance of her life, and where America would decide, for itself, what it chose to believe. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The coroner's inquest into the death of Johnny Stompanato was held on April 11th, 1958, 1 week after the killing, and it was less a legal proceeding than a spectacle, the most watched courtroom drama Hollywood had produced in years. More than 100 journalists packed the room. The atmosphere was chaotic, with interruptions and jostling and competing claims about what had really happened. The public appetite for the case was enormous. It had everything: a glamorous movie star, a mobster with ties to the most notorious crime boss in Los Angeles, a 14-year-old girl, a killing in a Beverly Hills mansion on Good Friday. The nation was riveted, waiting to learn whether Cheryl Crane would be charged with murder. Cheryl herself was not in the room. She was in juvenile custody, and her statement was read aloud on her behalf. The star witness, the center of the entire spectacle, was Lana Turner. Lana took the stand and testified for 62 minutes, and it became the most famous performance of her career, though whether it was a performance at all, or simply a terrified mother telling the truth about the worst night of her life, is a question that has never been settled. She recounted the day, the shopping trip with Stompanato, the escalating argument, the threats, the moment of the killing. She wept. She broke down. She described the months of abuse and terror Stompanato had inflicted on her, the violence, the threats to disfigure and kill her. By the end of her testimony, she had collapsed into tears on the stand, and the courtroom, and the country reading about it the next day, had been given an unforgettable portrait of a battered woman whose child had stepped in to save her. The coroner's jury deliberated briefly. Shortly before noon, the 10 men and 2 women returned their verdict: justifiable homicide. Cheryl Crane had killed Johnny Stompanato in defense of her mother and herself, and the killing was legally justified. She would not be charged. The district attorney announced that, barring new facts, he had no inclination to prosecute her. Legally, it was over. But the verdict did not settle the public's mind. It inflamed it. Because almost immediately, a large portion of the press and the public began to question whether they had been told the truth, and out of that suspicion grew the theory that has shadowed the case ever since. The theory was that Lana Turner had killed Johnny Stompanato herself. The logic of it was seductive. Lana was an actress, a professional at producing emotion on cue, and her tearful testimony could be read, cynically, as exactly that, a performance engineered to save the day. There had been a delay in calling the police, time enough, suspicious minds noted, to arrange a story and clean up a scene. There were reported inconsistencies about the position of the body and the angle of the wound. Cheryl, in later depositions for a civil suit, admitted her memory of the actual stabbing was blurred, which skeptics seized upon as evidence that she was covering for someone. And there was the powerful underlying motive. A 14-year-old would be treated as a juvenile and would walk free, while Lana Turner, a grown woman, might face real prison time and the end of her career. What better way to escape a murder charge than to have your child, who could not be seriously punished, take the blame? It was a compelling story. It was told and retold for decades. Some people believed it then, and some people believe it now, and it was almost certainly false. The evidence points clearly the other way. As we have seen, the police reports indicate that Lana Turner tried to take the blame herself, that she offered to tell the authorities she had done it, and that it was Cheryl who insisted on the truth. If Lana had killed Stompanato and wanted her daughter to be the scapegoat, she would not have volunteered to take responsibility. The whole point of the alleged scheme would have been for Lana to stay silent and let Cheryl confess. The mother trying to take the fall is the opposite of the conspiracy theory's central claim. Cheryl maintained her account consistently for the rest of her life, across a memoir and decades of interviews, never once recanting, never once suggesting her mother had done it. And the physical circumstances were fully consistent with a frightened teenager stabbing a man who was advancing on her mother. The conspiracy theory endured, not because the evidence supported it, but because the public found it more satisfying than the truth. It was easier, in a way, to believe that a movie star had killed her mobster lover and covered it up than to sit with the far more disturbing reality that a 14-year-old girl, a child, had killed a grown man, and had done it because her home had become so dangerous, so saturated with violence and threat that a child felt she had to take up a knife to survive it. That reality was the true scandal, and it was one that no one in 1958 wanted to look at directly. The verdict cleared Cheryl Crane of legal wrongdoing. It did not clear her of anything else. She was 14. She had killed a man. Her name and face were in every newspaper in the country, and the label of killer, justified or not, was now attached to her for life. The law had let her go. But she was not free, and she would not be free for a very long time. Cheryl Crane titled her memoir Detour, and the title came from her own understanding of what the killing had done to her life. Everything after that night was a detour, a violent swerve off the path her life might otherwise have taken, into years of chaos and self-destruction and institutions. She was released from juvenile custody in late April 1958 and placed under the guardianship of her grandmother. But there was no stable home to return to, no therapeutic support of the kind a traumatized child would receive today, no real reckoning with what she had survived or what she had done. She was a 14-year-old who had been sexually abused for 3 years, who had killed a man, who had been at the center of a national media circus, and the response of the adult world was essentially to shuffle her between custodial arrangements and hope she would settle down. She did not settle down. The years following Stompanato's death were, by Cheryl's own documentation, a spiral. Her rebellious behavior was covered extensively in the press, because she was famous now, permanently, as the girl who had killed her mother's lover, and every stumble was news. She was made a ward of the court and sent to a boarding school for girls, from which she rebelled and eventually ran away. She struggled with drugs. She was arrested. At one point, she was placed in a psychiatric institution. And in 1962, 4 years after the killing, Cheryl Crane attempted suicide. She was still a teenager. She had survived abuse, survived a killing, survived the media, survived the institutions, and the accumulated weight of all of it brought her, at 18 or 19, to the point of trying to end her own life. That she survived that too is a testament to something durable in her. But the attempt marks the lowest point of the detour, the moment when the damage nearly finished what it had started. It is worth pausing to name clearly what had happened to this young woman, because the sensational framing of the case, the movie star, and the mobster, and the knife, tends to obscure it. Cheryl Crane was a victim. She was a victim of childhood sexual abuse by a stepfather. She was a victim of profound parental neglect, raised by staff while her mother pursued her career and her marriages. She was a victim of a home environment so unstable and so saturated with adult dysfunction that a violent gangster ended up living in it. And she was, finally, a child who had been placed in the impossible position of having to kill a man to protect her mother, and who then had to carry the consequences of that act, the label and the trauma and the notoriety, for the rest of her life. None of it was her fault. All of it landed on her. The mother and the daughter processed the tragedy in opposite ways, and the contrast is revealing. Cheryl, by her own account, confronted the fallout directly, lived through the spiral, hit bottom, and eventually did the hard work of climbing out. Lana Turner did something else. Lana buried it, beneath alcohol, beneath more relationships, beneath an exaggerated version of her own movie star persona that Cheryl said her mother referred to as LT, a larger-than-life character Lana performed as a way of not being the frightened, damaged woman underneath. And in one of the harder ironies of the story, the scandal actually revived Lana Turner's career. The year after the killing, she starred in Imitation of Life, a melodrama that became one of the biggest hits of her career and one of the most successful films of 1959. The public that had been riveted by her real-life tragedy came out in force to see her on screen. The mother's career was resurrected by the scandal. The daughter's adolescence was destroyed by it. That contrast, the star rising while the child fell, is exactly what fueled the cruelest version of the story, the sense that Lana had somehow profited off her daughter's sacrifice. And whatever the truth of the killing itself, the aftermath did have that shape. Lana went back to being a movie star, more bankable than ever. Cheryl went to reform school, to the psychiatric ward, to the edge of suicide. But here is where the story turns, because Cheryl Crane did not stay on the detour. Slowly, against the odds, she found her way back to a road. She began to build a real life. She worked at her father's Los Angeles restaurant, the Luau, learning the business from the ground up. She discovered that she was good at it, that she had a head for hospitality and management. She studied restaurant management and hospitality, eventually at Cornell University, one of the best programs in the country, turning herself into a genuine professional in a field that had nothing to do with Hollywood or scandal or the thing she was famous for. She built a career in real estate. She became, over time, a functioning, successful, self-made woman, which for someone with her history was an extraordinary achievement. And she found love and stability and the thing she had never had as a child, a safe and lasting home. The safe and lasting home came in the form of a woman named Joyce Leroy, whom everyone called Josh. Cheryl met her, and something in her turbulent life finally steadied. Josh Leroy became Cheryl Crane's partner, and the relationship lasted for decades, through the rest of the 20th century and deep into the 21st, the single most stable and enduring relationship of Cheryl's life, more lasting than any of her mother's 8 marriages, more lasting than almost anything in the Turner Crane story. In 2014, after they had already been together for many years, Cheryl and Josh married, once it was legally possible for them to do so. The girl who had grown up in a home with no stable love, who had been passed between nannies and abused by a stepfather and nearly destroyed by everything that followed, had built, as an adult, exactly the thing she had never been given: a safe, faithful, lasting partnership with someone who stayed. That, in itself, is the quiet triumph of the story, the thing the tabloids never cared about because it was not sensational. Cheryl Crane survived, not just physically, but fully. She became a professional, a businesswoman, a partner, eventually an author. She constructed a good life out of the wreckage of a catastrophic childhood, and she did it without the help that was never offered to her when she needed it most. And in 1988, 30 years after the killing, she did something that took extraordinary courage. She told the truth. All of it. She published Detour, her memoir, and in it she finally revealed publicly what had been hidden for 3 decades: the sexual abuse by Lex Barker, the years of assault she had survived as a child, the neglect, the full context of the home she had grown up in. She had carried the label of killer since she was 14, and the public had never known the deeper story, the abuse and the trauma that had shaped the girl who picked up the knife. With Detour, Cheryl Crane took control of her own narrative for the first time. She stopped being only the subject of other people's sensational stories and became the author of her own. Naming Lex Barker in print was a genuinely brave act. Barker was dead by then, but he had been a beloved star, and accusing a dead celebrity of child sexual abuse, as a matter of public record, invited scrutiny and doubt and cruelty. Cheryl did it anyway, because it was true, and because telling the truth was, for her, part of the long work of healing. She was one of the earlier famous figures to speak openly about surviving childhood sexual abuse, decades before the culture developed any real vocabulary or support for such disclosures. And something unexpected and moving happened as a result. The memoir, which might have driven mother and daughter further apart, brought them closer. Lana Turner read her daughter's account, the whole painful truth of it, and rather than recoiling or denying, Lana told Cheryl that she was proud of her. She called her a gutsy lady for publishing the book. After a lifetime of failure and distance and the unspeakable thing that had bound them together on that Good Friday in 1958, Lana Turner and Cheryl Crane found their way, at last, to something like peace. They reconciled. In the final years of Lana's life, the 2 women, who had been through more together than almost any mother and daughter in the public eye, found a way to love each other. Cheryl was present and connected to her mother at the end. When Lana Turner died of throat cancer in 1995, at 74, she and her daughter had made their peace. Years later, in 2008, Cheryl would publish a second book about her mother, Lana, The Memories, the Myths, the Movies, a warmer, gentler tribute, a coffee table book of photographs and remembrance. It was the book of a daughter who had forgiven, who had chosen, after everything, to hold on to the love rather than the damage. Look at the whole shape of it. A little girl born into wealth and fame and raised with almost no love, handed to nannies while her movie star mother worked and married and divorced. A child sexually abused for 3 years by a stepfather in her own home, while the adults who should have protected her saw nothing. A 14-year-old who had already learned that safety was something she might have to seize with a weapon because no one would hand it to her. A night of violence in which that child killed a gangster to protect the mother who had failed to protect her. A blame she took, truthfully, and never put down. A verdict that cleared her legally and a public that whispered about her for the rest of her life. A spiral into drugs and institutions and a suicide attempt. And then, against all of it, a climb back out, into work and success, and a lasting love, and the courage, finally, to tell the whole truth. The headlines of 1958 called it a scandal, and they made it about the movie star and the mobster, the glamour and the knife. But the real story was never about Lana Turner or Johnny Stompanato. The real story was about a child who was failed by every adult who was supposed to protect her, who survived what those adults did and did not do, who took a blame that a grown woman offered to carry for her, and who spent a lifetime becoming a whole person anyway. Cheryl Crane took the blame for a death in her mother's bedroom. What she was really taking the blame for, in a sense, was the failure of everyone around her, a mother too absent to protect her, a stepfather who preyed on her, a household so dangerous that a child ended up with a knife in her hand. She carried all of it. And the remarkable thing, the thing worth remembering long after the sensational details fade, is not that she killed a man at 14. It is that she survived everyone who was supposed to keep her from ever having to. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.